About a year ago, Jason Schreier of Bloomberg had reported that there was some sort of Halo Infinite Battle Royale that was in the works. And this was never confirmed by Microsoft. It was never confirmed by 343 Industries. So this is all to be taken with a tremendous grain of salt. But there's some more recent rumors that are popping up now that have said that Battle Royale mode has been canceled after 2 or 2+ years of development, which isn't really an awful thing. I don't know how many people were actually asking for Battle Royale in Halo. It just doesn't make sense. It works for Call of Duty, doesn't make sense here. But that just points out to me that Microsoft and 343 have a really big Halo problem on their hands, and I just don't think they know what to do with this franchise. This was a franchise that started out very, very strong. You know, it was the leading thing for Xbox. Like, Master Chief was their mascot. When you talk about consoles with people, there are certain anchors that are immediately going to come to mind for people. For Nintendo, it's Mario, Link, maybe to a lesser extent, you're talking about Donkey Kong Country, Kirby, whatever. For Sony, there's a whole bunch of characters that can come to mind. I mean, you could probably think Ellie and Joel or Kratos, perhaps Sackboy, perhaps Nathan Drake, because, you know, they just got a lot of different exclusives under that ecosystem. I mean, Sony has that game down pat compared to Microsoft. But when it comes to Microsoft and the Xboxes, the first thing that immediately comes to mind for everyone, again, it's Master Chief and Halo. And this franchise is dying on the vine. And the fact that they were even working that hard and that long on a battle royale mode just shows that they don't get it. They are chasing financial trends as opposed to trying to craft something that makes sense for that world and that universe and delivering that to their players. And it's been pretty clear that they've been trying to chase these monetization trends all the while. Now, obviously, Bungie were the ones that created this franchise, Halo 1 through 3. You know, and then there was also Halo 3 ODST, which I think 343 had developed. And then I think Bungie did Halo Reach. I'd have to go back and check on that. But 343 didn't officially become the stewards of the Halo franchise until Halo 4. When Halo 4 dropped, I thought that they did an excellent job. I know that's not a popular opinion. I know a lot of people don't feel this way, but I really like the single player campaign. I thought it looked good. I thought it played really well. I really liked the direction that the story was going in. I liked the new enemies that I was battling up against. Solid A+ for me all around. And the multiplayer package, all the maps and everything like that, I had a really good time playing that stuff as well. So I have no complaints about that game. And then Halo 5 came out, and it was like they had no idea where to take the story from there. The single player campaign was so disappointing. From a narrative perspective, it just went nowhere. And even in the advertisements for that game, the commercials, they were advertising something that was going on with the story that didn't even take place within the game, really. It never went in the direction that they were sort of alluding to. So that was a head scratcher. And as far as the actual gameplay and the level design was concerned, keep in mind that Halo was always a linear sort of a first-person shooting experience, right? There were open areas for some larger scale battles to occur during those campaigns, sure. But in Halo 5, they took that linear design and they really, really crunched it down. I mean, even in outdoor areas in that game, I felt like the walls were just literal corridors a lot of the time. I felt like the walls were just squeezing in from the sides and giving me a little bit of a claustrophobic feeling, and it was awful. And add to that the fact that they just reused the same boss like multiple times throughout the course of that campaign. I have no idea what they were thinking. What I will say, though, is that Halo 5's multiplayer, it was okay. You know, like, it felt really good to play. They introduced a new game mode in Halo 5 called Warzone. We won't get that confused with Call of Duty Warzone. Let's get that out of our system right now. But Warzone was a really great multiplayer mode that had so much potential in order to really revitalize everything Halo related. I mean, that one game mode alone, I think, could have carried that game through to the next game, and it just couldn't do it. And the reason why, again, it's the monetization models that Microsoft and 343 were chasing after. In Warzone, they are these large-scale maps, right? Big team battle sort of a thing. But players aren't like just trying to rack up kills. No, your team wins based on the amount of points that your team earns throughout the match. There are certain like bosses that appear throughout the course of the match. And if your team can go and be the one to take them down, that puts a lot of points on the board for you. So if your team is really down and out, though, it's not over until it's over. What they did with this multiplayer mode is they gave players cards to use. They could play and earn cards. So if there was a specific weapon that players wanted to use, they could just go into their little arsenal of cards, throw down the card and be like, great, I have a shotgun now. That's going to be great for close quarters combat in order to defend this position. Or if you're near the end of a match and you're like, we're behind, but we really need to pull off a clutch win here,
I'm going to throw down a flippin' tank.
And we're going to roll over the enemy and we're going to win. There was an incentive to keep playing, to not give up, to not have people rage quit, because it really wasn't over until the timer struck 0. Sounds like a great idea, right? But unfortunately, the monetization model that they were chasing after just ruined everything entirely because, you know, when you were just earning cards through gameplay, you weren't really getting a lot of the good stuff. You were more likely to get the really good cards to use if you bought those cards through microtransactions, which was really unfortunate because it completely destroyed the ideology behind how they wanted people to play the game. They wanted people to feel incentivized to drop those cards. Instead, people were saying, well, I don't know, we're behind, but like, I don't want to waste this card if we're not going to win, so I'm just going to hold on to it, completely dismantling everything that they were working for. And that's what allowed me to just jump off of that multiplayer and never return to it again. And then Halo Infinite, that's another game that was released with a single player campaign. This one had more potential than Halo 5, I will give it that. Playing certain parts of the single player campaign was a lot of fun. When you go to the really large bases on the map, this was an open world game. It was a first for the franchise. Going to the large enemy bases, it was a lot of fun to clear those out. There were also smaller encampments dotted throughout the map. Those were fun to take out. And there were only a couple of other like side things going on the map at any given moment, though. So mostly what you were left with this large open world was a lot of dead, empty, open space where there was nothing going on. Not even like really like stray enemies to contend with for the most part, except for the occasional grunt. So overall, it was pretty disappointing. There were some reports that they had to change things up pretty considerably in the development of that game about 2 years prior to launch. And for me, that absolutely showed. And they tried something different with the multiplayer this time around too. For the multiplayer, they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're kind of do the free to play thing like Call of Duty's doing with their Warzone, what Fortnite is doing with their Battle Royale. We're going to break off Halo Infinite's multiplayer and we're going to make that free to play. So people don't have to buy the campaign if they don't want to. They can just download the multiplayer for free. But of course, we're going to sell people skins. We're going to sell season passes. And that's how we're going to hope to make money off of this. And having the multiplayer for free, the multiplayer is what people ultimately care about when it comes to this franchise. It's what keeps people playing for years and years and years. So if we give it to them for free, they're going to be much more likely to be with us long term, and that's going to give them more and more opportunities to spend money on those season passes and skins and whatnot. But unfortunately, the Battle Pass was garbage. The very first Battle Pass that dropped had no incentive for people to buy into it. All you really got, for the most part, were different colors for the suit of armor that you wore. Nothing that really like stood out and made your character model look different from everyone else's. If you wanted those kinds of changes to your armor set, you had to buy the skins individually for a pretty hefty price from their marketplace or their shop or whatever you want to call it. So that was problematic for a lot of people. A lot of people were upset about that. Not to mention there were issues with the multiplayer just as far as gameplay was concerned as well. There were a lot of issues with stabilization and sort of like trying to like level out everyone's pings and everything. So there were a lot of issues with like hit registration, and that made a lot of people really upset and annoyed, and rightfully so, because while every game has to contend with that problem to a certain degree, it seemed to really not be handled that well in Halo Infinite. My understanding is that it's gotten somewhat better over the course of time, but the problem still exists. So still not a lot of interest. They have continued to generate interest in that game by dropping certain things like, you know, bringing in like the Forge mode and allowing people to create a whole bunch of maps, which is something that's been part of Halo for a long time. And the fact that that wasn't available closer to launch of this game is really mind-boggling, but that's neither here nor there at this point. And as far as we know, 343 are now working on what's to be the next big Halo game. But at this point, like, I can't be excited in what they're working on. I just can't. The fact that every step of the way, the financial decisions have been driving every single thing that they've been doing for this franchise. Single player campaign, let's not worry so much about that. Let's push the multiplayer. Let's push the microtransactions. Let's push the season pass. Let's push the skins in the shop. Let's do all that stuff. The game, nah. We'll just give it a couple of years. Who cares if you have to restart the project halfway through your development cycle and start over again? It's not going to be that big of a deal, right? And what that says to me is that even behind the scenes, there's not a whole lot of confidence in any of the work that's been happening for these games along the way. But at some point, you just have to suck up the financial investment that's being made into these games. And Microsoft and 343 have to say, well, we're going to have to release something at some point, regardless of how we feel about it. So let's just get it done and kick it out the door, which is very unfortunate for what's supposed to be the marquee franchise under the Microsoft umbrella. Literally just throwing ideas against the wall and hoping to see what's going to stick. And unfortunately, not many of them have stuck thus far. If they don't have confidence in what they've been working on all this time, ever since 343 took over, I certainly don't have confidence in it at all. And that makes me sad because I do vastly prefer the Xbox ecosystem overall, right? I feel like Microsoft's advancements over the course of time with crossplay, with backwards compatibility, their Game Pass, all of that stuff is fantastic. And it really shows that, at least now, they really care about catering to gamers in a way that other brands, even including Sony, are not doing. But next generation comes around. I mean, if Microsoft are backing off of the console space allegedly at some point so that they could go third party, I have some information about that on a previous video I did. I'll have the link to that down in the description below. But otherwise, Microsoft really doesn't have much going for them in the exclusivity department. So if that's what's happening in the Microsoft space, they're not really going to be hitting the marks with the games that they're going to be releasing in the future. I guess my next console, next generation, my first one at least anyway, is going to have to be a PlayStation 6 because, like, what incentive do I have to stay within the Microsoft ecosystem at this point? I mean, I'll always be a part of it, right? I have a humongous library of games there, but I think it's going to be time to move on. They're just not nailing anything, you know? Like, they just had Starfield come out. It was a pretty big disappointment. Now, to be fair, that game was in development long before Microsoft bought Bethesda even, right? And if it wasn't for Microsoft, Starfield probably would have been a really clunky, buggy, broken game, sort of like most of the open world Bethesda RPGs are at the time of launch. Microsoft really helped put some shine and some polish on that game, which I have to hand it to Microsoft and give them credit for that, for sure. But it's just really sad. Like, seeing this happen to Master Chief and Halo, it's like watching like Mario games just become totally irrelevant. And, you know, that was sort of happening with Mario in the Nintendo space, at least for the 2D titles. But they have learned to reinvigorate that. Super Mario Brothers Wonder has done wonderful things for that franchise, and sort of taking like a cross 3D / 2D platforming approach with the Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario 3D World games. You know, they are always trying to innovate and keep things fresh. And it seems like the only thing that they're trying to innovate with the franchise, the Halo franchise, is how they can extract more money out of you. And it shows in the end product, unfortunately. Like, you have to deliver a good product first. And if you're going to throw on some monetization on top of that, like, you got to figure that out somewhere in the process before the game launches, of course, and earlier in the development cycle, because you have to plan for that sort of thing, of course. But you have to focus on delivering a stellar game that just works and is fun to play, doesn't feel rushed, doesn't feel hollow, doesn't feel empty, and Halo's just not there. So, unfortunately, we might be saying rest in peace to Halo in the not too distant future. And I just really hope that if the next game bombs, Microsoft either just lets that sleeping dog lie, lets Halo just sort of fade on into the sunset somehow, or they kick 343 Industries to the curb. 343 Industries are just not getting it done with Halo. I'm sure there are other studios out there that would be chomping at the bit for the opportunity to take on Halo for themselves and reinvigorate that franchise and make it good again. If you like this kind of content, if you like hearing opinions about what's happening in the video game industry or just opinions about certain video games in general, please make sure that you subscribe, you like the video, you hit the notification bell, all of that good stuff. And if you want to talk about it live with me while I'm streaming at some point, I'm on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Link is down in the description below. Take care of yourselves, everyone.